Average utility bill over 2 years, $69 a month. And that's for everything. That's heating, your space, your hot water. We weren't cooking too much then. It'll be interesting to see what it turns into with me living here, but I bet it's not going to be a lot more than that. So that's the dollars and cents of why you do it. It's pretty exciting. We're going to get solar panels on the roof here. Our other two houses already have them. Then it's going to be $15 a month of the service charge to your utility company. That'll be it.
Welcome to the Regenerative Real Estate Podcast, a show about human environments and how they can be used as a force for good. Conversations that educate and inspire people looking for a different way to do real estate. I'm Neil Collins, and on this episode, I'm joined by Greg Hale, the developer behind the Catskill Project, a 90-acre carbon-neutral community with homes designed to all Passive House standards located in upstate New York. For those of you that haven't heard of Passive House, this is a design standard that seeks to create extremely energy efficient buildings, which reduces a building's overall ecological footprint. Due to intentional site orientation, good insulation, and thermal massing, Passive House buildings require just a fraction of the energy to heat or cool a home compared to more conventional designs. While the industry as a whole seems to be going in the direction of requiring more energy efficiency in new buildings, Passive House goes far beyond code requirements in virtually all places. And it's relatively unheard of for an entire neighborhood or community to have these kinds of strict design requirements. And this is why it was interesting to talk with Greg Hale about the Catskill Project. In this episode, we talk about Greg's background as a real estate attorney and how he took his passion for sustainability and infused it into development. The Catskill Project is a project that he has dubbed a community of the future. And I've got to tell you, it sounds absolutely magical with beautiful homes set on rolling terrain, trees, and trails. Now, I know a developer's job is to paint a rose-colored picture of their project. But this show isn't just about the highlight reel, and Greg really honors that by bringing a spirit of honesty and candor to talk about the process of creating the Catskill Project. It sounds like it has been no easy feat, as he's had to navigate a myriad of challenges such as skyrocketing prices due to COVID and finding the right way to tell a resident story with potential homebuyers. So before we get into this episode, I want to take a second to get into our ecosystem directory spotlight. This directory is our Rolodex of companies and organizations that are purpose-aligned in regeneration that we use to create life-giving, healthy, resilient homes, habitats, and communities. It can be found on our website at chooselatitude.com/ecosystem-directory. The directory member I want to highlight today is the Pacific Northwest-based lender called Craft3, as in the number 3. Craft3 is a nonprofit CDFI that makes loans to strengthen economic, ecological, and family resilience. Their loans not only go towards innovative projects and businesses in the region, but they also help nonprofits and homeowners unable to access conventional financing. You can learn more about them by visiting their website at craft3.org. So now, without further ado, let's get into the conversation with Greg Hale. Well, Greg, it is a pleasure to have you on to the Regenerative Real Estate Podcast. And I know talking with you before this that you've got a long background before maybe real estate development, but there's been this interesting thread of energy efficiency and things like that. But I want to back up before all that. Who are you and where did you come from? I love to start there.
Well, I grew up outside of New York City, and I would say that I've been an environmentalist from a pretty early age, and I trace that back to going to camp for about 5 years up in the Adirondacks in summer camp and climbing a bunch of the 46ers. And it's just been a prevailing theme in my life and has helped lead me to where I am today. So I am a lawyer, went to Michigan, pretty excited about the football season this year. And I started and was trained as a real estate lawyer. Spent about 7 years with a very large firm, New York and Los Angeles, working on major real estate deals and learning the trade. And then I left there to join a partner of a friend of mine from college, and we ran an entity called Cirque Property in Salt Lake City, Utah, and wound up buying a bunch of properties throughout the Intermountain West, Utah, Nevada, Arizona, had some deals in California, Colorado, but really cut my teeth on running a real estate business. So I had the legal side and the business side, and that's all contributed to where I am today. Took some time after that gig to study photography. I studied at the International Center for Photography, but wound up spending about 7 years working on black and white photography, learning how to develop film and print from negatives. It really helped indulge the artistic side of my brain, and I think that's an important piece of what we're doing here at the Catskill Project as well. The other thing I feel that I need to mention is that our company is actually called Regen Associates, and that's for Regenerative. And that's the philosophy behind the work that we do.
Yeah, we've got to pick up a couple of those threads before we get into the Catskills projects, Greg, because I'm really curious if you're coming out as an environmentalist, and I think that is a pattern that we see with a lot of the culture creators and visionaries that come onto this podcast, is something that from a very young age just gets cemented into their soul or their essence. How do you go into real estate? Was that intentionally through your legal practice or your legal studies, or was it just happenstance that you ended up at a firm specializing in real estate law?
Yeah, it was almost happenstance. I got invited to be a member of the firm and was asked to choose a department, and it just sounded really interesting to me. I'd liked my property course in law school. I didn't know that was going to dictate the whole path of my career, but as I got into it, I got more and more interested in real estate, and both the legal side and the business side. So the other step between there and the Catskill Project is I've been working for New York State for over a decade now. First with the governor's office, the executive chamber, working under the Secretary of Energy and Finance, Richard Kaufman, and then shifted over from there to NYSERDA, which is the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, which is the state's energy office. But still, both of those roles were very focused on buildings, and now it's, okay, how do you make them more efficient? And then about halfway through the time, really started shifting from net zero energy to net zero carbon. So how do you really decarbonize the building stock? And that's such an important challenge. It's such a major part of the emissions profile that we really need to fix. And it's kind of one of the hardest things to do because all the buildings are different that are out there today.
Can you share a little bit more about that differentiation for the listeners that aren't familiar with net zero energy versus net zero carbon?
Sure. So net zero energy is essentially just that you're going to produce as much energy on site through PV panels on your roof or potentially other clean energy systems as you utilize, right? So you try to lower the demand of your building through efficiency, through focus on your envelope and your insulation, and then you try to offset the amount of energy that you're going to use with clean energy. And it's closely related to net zero carbon, but it's not the same thing. Net zero carbon is about essentially operationally, you don't want to be emitting any carbon. And then to be truly carbon neutral, you need to be offsetting the carbon that is embedded in your materials and construction processes and transportation. Offset that through natural sequestration or other techniques on site. So a lot of people think net zero carbon and they go directly to the operational side, which is really important. But that's carbon that will be emitted over the life cycle of your building over decades. And the carbon that you're using in your materials, it's already been emitted, right? So the more you can shrink your embodied carbon, it's really an important piece of getting at emissions reduction quickly.
When did you find that this started to really enter into maybe even your own lexicon? I mean, if you're doing a lot of deals out west, was this on the radar? Was even net zero energy on the radar?
Nope, it really wasn't. We were buying product for one thing, not really developing. We did a couple of smaller development deals, but mostly buying stuff that was already built. So we were trying to do no harm. I don't think we were increasing our environmental footprint, but it was more of a side gig. And, I did my environmental stuff elsewhere and tried not to do any damage through my work. But net zero energy, I'm sure that people were talking about it, but it was clearly not in the mainstream. I mean, it's been quite a road over the last 10, 11 years with New York State to get people actually talking about net zero energy. They used to kind of make fun of me as the net zero guy, kind of the wacky net zero guy, right? Because we knew about net zero energy buildings. And then we started thinking, we're not going to solve this problem building by building. We need to do this at a community scale. So, what about a net zero block or a net zero village, right? And then sort of jokingly, we were saying, oh, well, what we should really have is a net zero state. Thinking we were being funny, optimistically funny, 6-7 years ago. And now we have that legislatively mandated. It's pretty exciting how fast New York State got to the point of understanding that you need to get here and actually backing this with law. The Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, or CLCPA, was passed in 2019. And it essentially says New York will be net zero climate-wise by 2050 across the entire economy. And that's by a lot of emissions reduction, 85%, and offsetting the other 15%. So, I went from sort of an outlier to everybody's talking about it now. And that's great in my mind because we got a lot of issues these days in the world, but I think climate is the most pressing one out there.
Where do you find your home building peers within New York State? Oftentimes, gosh, I'm going to make an enemy out of a huge trade association, but the Home Builders Association and bodies like that, it seems like they're a bit laggard in these kinds of regulations. Do you find that this is also true, or have they been champions of this kind of policy?
I think the organizations are, you call them laggards, resisting. They don't want to see regulations passed that increase the cost of building houses. And to build to passive house level, it does cost a little more. We think that it's entirely repaid over the lifetime of your investment through much lower operating costs, to say nothing of the improved comfort, and it's just quality construction. But yeah, they've been resistant. The realtor network is resistant, and you can tell who the resistors are. It's no secret who's coming out against some of the regulatory policy. So I said we have this law in New York about getting to carbon neutrality, and then that's backed up by what's called a scoping plan. It was organized by Climate Action Council. It was passed by that council. It was a 22-member body appointed by legislature. Anyway, so we have this plan, but the plan itself isn't law. Getting to the goals of the plan is law, but then you have to actually enact different pieces of it, either through regulation or through legislation. And so we actually did pass pretty exciting legislation in New York State this year that says that come January 1st of 2026, which is really right around the corner, you're not going to be allowed to build a single family house or any low-rise building. I think it's under 7 stories that is not all electric. All new construction will be required to be all electric. And building codes are catching up pretty quickly. We're not going to have a passive house required building code in the next few years, but the next code cycle will bring advances in the required insulation and air sealing for envelopes too, which is the other side of getting to passive house net zero type standards.
You think that's going to throw a wrench into a lot of the building trades in New York, or do you think is it going to spur a cottage industry? Like what's your crystal ball telling you about people catching up to the regulations?
I don't think new construction is going to create a cottage industry. There are certainly architecture, engineering, construction companies. There are those that have figured this out already and are designing projects. They're designing tall multifamily buildings to passive house standards in New York that are all electric today, and they're starting to build them. It can be done, and in larger buildings, it's really not all that much more expensive if you start with those targets as your initial goals. Smaller buildings like the houses we build here at the project, there are definitely increased costs involved, but if you're going to have to do it, you might as well start now. Any building that is built today with fossil fuel heating systems are going to be obsolete well before those heating systems reach the end of their useful life. And so you're going to have to design a whole new heating system. On big buildings, it's not as simple as take out this boiler and put in a heat pump. How is it distributed through the building? People should be designing to that today, and I think they are. New York City has its own climate act. Part of that is called Local Law 97, which is actually an emissions cap on all buildings over 25,000 square feet. So the large buildings are already looking into this. The first compliance and reporting period starts actually next year. So this is happening. And if you don't meet the targets, then you wind up paying fines. And so that's about existing buildings, which is a whole other can of worms, actually a much more difficult problem to solve than new construction. New construction, people are just going to need to figure out how to build it the way the regulations require. And there isn't that much residential new construction in New York State. It's not like places out west and in the Sun Belt where people are building dozens of 100, 200 home communities or anything like that. It's a smaller industry in New York State.
Well, let's start putting some of these puzzle pieces together, Greg, because we've got kind of the policy and the regulatory and the energy efficiency. But I know that you're sitting in Livingston Manor right now. You are a principal of the Catskills Project. Why don't let's start with broad strokes. What is the Catskills Project?
Well, the first thing I need to do is make it clear this is not a NYSERDA project. It's authorized outside activity for me. They know about it. Lots of folks from NYSERDA have been up here and checked it out, but this is my own gig on my own time. So what it is a single-family residential community. It's envisioned to be 25 houses. We have subdivided lots for 25 houses. We have 11 on the market right now. And the concept is that we will be an entirely carbon neutral community. and entirely a passive house community. The house that I'm sitting in, that I actually live in now, I moved here last month, is going to be certified by the Passive House Institute as a low energy building. And so what it means is that each one of our houses will take very little energy to run. And then it means that it needs to be all electric. And then you have to make sure that the source of your electricity is clean. Those are really the three elements. I happen to write our HOA's declaration of covenants and restrictions, etc. It happened to be something that I knew how to do from my legal training, and I did one of these before during my real estate years. But so this document requires that every house not be heated through fossil fuel combustion. Can't heat your space, can't heat your water, can't cook your food, can't dry your clothes. So all of those need to be all electric. And we actually build the houses, so we know how to do it and make them comfortable and make them work right. But so you need a regulatory regime that says you can't burn fossil fuels here. And then we also require everybody to use 100% clean energy, preferably through solar and storage on your lot. But if you don't want to do that, then by going through community solar or potentially through a green energy provider. But so when you put all those pieces together, that gets you to operational carbon neutrality. Meaning, as you're living here, there are no emissions. So that's pretty exciting. I get to sort of walk the talk that way. And we take it another step further and look at our materials, because that's the other part of our carbon equation, is what is the embodied carbon in the represented or emitted in making your materials and transporting them to the site and building your houses. So we're very careful about that, limit our use of cement, almost no steel. So it's really wood frame construction. Then you also need to look at your insulation materials. We use dense packed cellulose, which is a plant-based material, as opposed to foam. Foam is a great insulator, but there's a lot of embodied carbon used to create the foam and to apply it. So we don't do that. We use dense packed cellulose and really think about our materials from top to bottom. Our countertops are Rich Light, which is a recycled paper, essentially, and functions beautifully. It doesn't look like recycled paper, but it is. And then we also think about circularity. So what can we use that was already here? So when we clear where we have to clear, and this is a big property. It's 90 acres for the first 11 houses, 150 acres for the whole project. The lots are 3 to 6 acres, and then there's a 40-acre conservation area that we restricted from any type of development. But as we do need to clear, when we hit trees that have the right girth and straightness, then we cut those logs and ship them up to a mill in Owego, which is about an hour and a half away. And they actually mill it down to products that we used in the house. And we've used it for flooring, for baseboards, cherry ceilings, cherry stair treads. We've got maple panels. So it's mostly ash, maple, and cherry, but are really pretty excited about being able to utilize that. And we think that's an attractive offer, too, to the clients who are coming and looking at it. It's like, oh, well, yeah, that baseboard is actually from a tree that was right on my property before. And we find stones as we're excavating and use those for landscaping or paths, and just try to use as much as we can that we find on site, so we're not, creating unnecessary manufacturing processes.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, just materials of that place, I think, strike a deeper resonance with the residents that will be living there. Now, I want to go back to really how do you bring something like this into existence? And starting, because you had mentioned this, the Regen Associates, how do you bring that team together? How do you coalesce around that name? And then what was the process of finding this particular property?
So between my earlier stuff and joining New York State, I worked for NRDC, the Natural Resources Defense Council, 4 or 5 years. And I met my partner there, Peter Malik, my primary partner. And he was interested in doing a real estate development, didn't have experience in doing it. But he has had a house up in this area. So that's why we wound up coming to Livingston Manor. It's an up-and-coming region in the Western Catskills. A lot of new businesses, restaurants, and galleries, and there's a lot of art happening here. Anyway, he knew the area and wanted to do a development, and he's an environmentalist also. So he was talking to me about doing it. I got excited because I'd been out of the real estate development, project world for a while, and was excited to get back into the sort of transactional side of my background. He was already oriented toward doing it sustainably, and then I kind of pushed him to, well, if we're going to do this, let's really step out there and make this a truly net zero carbon development. And in talking with Peter, he was interested in this idea, and we came across an architect, Buck Moorhead, who has also had a house up in this general vicinity. And he's very oriented toward Passive House. In fact, he's the current chair of New York Passive House Association. So he was very interested in this idea also. And then we came up with the idea of, well, let's call ourselves, we're going to be Regenerative Associates, but that was already taken, probably by you guys. So we settled on Regen. But that was the idea, was this is how we're going to do things. And this is our first project. And, conventional wisdom says you want to be the second mover. We're the first mover. And we also forgot to plan for the pandemic. So, we're in a difficult market right now. We have sold a couple of houses and have just finished them out of our 11. And we have this one that I'm in and 2 more. Families have moved in. It's really exciting. But the market is challenging today. Mortgage rates aren't helping us either, but we'll see, and hopefully the sales will pick up here, and then we can think about other projects where we can take this concept, whether it's the same type of design, single family, or into other types of real estate. There are multifamily projects that are in New York State that are carbon neutral. So like an apartment complex. Only a few people are building them that way so far, but I think more will be coming along the pike.
That's interesting. I didn't know that. I know that there's a lot out of Maine, and it seems like the Northeast in general, there's some just really tremendous work that's going on. For the Catskills Project, Greg, how do you come into the site planning? It looks like you've got 3 to 6 acre lots on a lot of them. Was there a decision there around, what's the ideal size versus maybe clustering the houses? Like, how do you land on that? And was it always like, were you going to sell lots, or were you going to go vertical with the construction?
Yeah, so our plan has always been to go vertical. Our methodology is to sell a lot and then take a contract back from the purchaser to build our house. And it will be one of the models that we offer. This way we know we're getting the passive house construction and the carbon neutrality that is so important to the project. We did not pick a particularly easy site to develop. In fact, we picked a particularly difficult site to develop because we were just so attracted to the land itself. It's got a lot of topography. Where you can wind up putting houses is pretty well defined by what the property looks like already. And The rest of it is steep. There's all sorts of water, which of course creates waterfalls. And we have a trail system around our conservation area that goes by probably, I'd say, 5 different waterfalls of varying heights, from 3 feet to really big stuff that you might find in a state park sometime. So we're really attracted to that, but we didn't make it easy on ourselves. And the county and the town that we're in didn't make it particularly easy on us either. We wanted to do cluster development, but they really didn't know how to do it and would be following a rule book that would make us put in a central water treatment plant for 11 houses. And, the economics just don't make sense at all. So we've wound up, our house sites are relatively closely dispersed around our community road, housing. So you can have less impact on the land, but then have all of the opportunity out there for the open space. There's tremendous hiking and biking and paddling and fishing and all sorts of good stuff around here.
Yeah, in the urban planning world, the craze has been for the last, decade or so, transit-oriented development. Yeah. But I'm like, how about trail-oriented development? I think that makes so much more sense. Did you put the conservation easement on and do any transfer development rights or anything like that? Or was it just, we're going to protect this land over here?
I was hoping we would get some type of a tax benefit out of it, but there wasn't any. You need a taker of that easement, of a conservation easement, an official like a Open Space Institute or Conservation International or somebody. And this was 40 acres isn't big enough. Anyway, we couldn't find a taker for the easement, so there's no tax benefit, but we recorded the restrictions. So there's no development in perpetuity. Frankly, it wasn't a big give. Those 40 acres are very rugged, and it would have been hard to find a place to put a house. But anyway, we did it ourselves. And interesting that you mentioned the trail-oriented development, because that's what we are. The next 2 phases of this development are actually served by different entrance roads. They're all contiguous, but the roads come in from different angles, and the element that will tie everything together is a trail system coming up to the community pond that we built and past the waterfalls I was talking to you about, and other phases have beautiful meadows and streams. And so the trail system is really envisioned to be the tying thread to the community.
Wow, that sounds so cool. Is there any agriculture that's taking place on site?
We thought about that. We wanted to do that conceptually when we started, and it just turned out not to be feasible. Again, the 40 acres are rugged. It's not like a lovely field where you could plant stuff. And then, we thought about farming, and the issue there is it's beautiful when it's just about to be harvested, right, for about a month of the year. But the rest of the year, it's not exactly an aesthetically appealing element, right? Because you got either fallow earth or freshly plowed. You got the manure that so you got to think about the odors to the community. And we would have to have found a farmer that wanted to do it. We may still do small community garden kind of plots so people can get out and do their own little vegetable gardens. I think that's a great idea. What we'd like to do is expand into the artistic community a little bit. We do have, these couple of acres that we have that are outside of individual lots or the conservation easement, there could be a garden of a different type, a sculpture garden. And we happen to have a great regional art center here in Livingston Manor called the Catskill Art Space that has some pretty heavy-duty exhibits. There's a James Durrell right now. Pretty cool exhibit. But we'd like to do something where we work with them and offer our land to be spaces for exhibiting public art. So, outdoor sculptures, essentially. Think
Oh, I love
mini,
that.
mini Storm King. I think that that's a really important tie because, as I said, that Livingston Manor is really an epicenter. This whole region of the Catskills here in Sullivan County has a very vibrant artistic community, and I'd really like to tie into that.
Yeah, what a great way to integrate into the community as well and create more linkages there. What's generally been the marketing approach here, Greg? I mean, you look at the website and it's beautiful and it has some really good information on there. And there's some themes that I can bring up, but I'd love to hear just how y'all really thought about this, of how to position it towards the marketplace.
Well, that's been a challenging element for us. So our first two buyers are perfect buyers. They really care about the idea of the low energy passive house, the carbon neutrality, but finding the folks who care about this and really want to be involved in a community like this is not easy. We've been through two different brokerages who were our selling agents and decided at the end of this summer that we were going to take it in-house because they didn't seem to be able to put their finger on the pulse of that market either. So we now
Why is
have
that?
an internal team that is working on social media and Google search optimization and trying to figure out how we do get to the right folks who are interested. We've had a number of open houses here. We have partnered with the International Passive House entity organization that runs tours, just has a passive house open house day a couple times a year. So we've been part of that a few times and gotten some interested people in. A lot of times the people who come to these are not necessarily buyers, but they're people who want to understand how to build a passive house on their property someplace. Or maybe they have 10 acres and they want to build a couple of houses and do a community or something like that. So, and we're very happy to share. That's part of our model, is to share how we do things. So you ask a great question. If we knew exactly how to tap into that market, I'd tell you. We're working on it. We are definitely getting more people to show up recently over the last few months. Interest has rebounded again, which is exciting for us. And we're getting people, when people come here, the place often really resonates with them because they get it that this is not greenwashing. This is the real thing. And we are committed. We're the principals. I'm here when we have an open house, walk around the trails with people and talk to them. And, they get it that we're really invested in what we're doing here. And this is our project. And, we're not figureheads at a desk 5 states away or something like that.
Yeah. Why do you think two sales teams couldn't quite wrap their heads around it?
I think that part of it was just that they weren't up to speed on what passive house high performance building is about. Carbon neutrality was not in their lexicon. Frankly, the second team wound up hitting a really bad market time also with the price pressures from the pandemic. If we weren't going to build at a loss, which we don't like to do, we had to raise our prices. So there were market dynamics involved as well, but it just didn't seem, the whole concept didn't seem to resonate with the groups. They could sort of talk about it, but not the way any of us could. And we just thought that it was a better approach to, frankly, save the selling commission dollars and invest those in other marketing, open houses, the social, the Google searches, etc. We're trying this approach of doing it ourselves, and we think that we're the best at showing what we have here because we're so invested in it and we understand it, and we're kind of low pressure people. I'm not a salesman, but I play one here at the Catskill Project.
Well, I do like the themes that you have on your website, which, really plays at health and wellness and what can come about from building to passive house design standards of
Yeah, I think
indoor
that
air quality. And
I do want to jump in on that health and wellness point. And there are a fair amount of data points out there that tell us that home buyers today are really focused on healthy housing. They want efficiency, they want healthy housing, they're interested in solar and storage, all of which we have, all electric housing. It's what we do. But the health thing is really important. And that's one of the big attributes of a passive house. It's really well insulated. It's really well sealed. So you're not conditioning the outdoors. But if you just stop there, then you can wind up with unhealthy indoor air because you're not getting enough ventilation. So part of passive house is this 24/7 active ventilation called energy recovery ventilation, which is really cool because as you're exhausting the air, you're transferring the thermal energy to pre-treat the incoming air. So in the wintertime, you're taking the heat out of your exhaust air, pre-treating your incoming air with that heat so that your heating system doesn't have to work as hard. But what that's really doing is providing you with an extremely healthy environment, particularly when you add the right filtration to it, which we do with a MERV 13 filter. So when we had those weird smoke-filled days this summer from the Canadian wildfires, you could actually tell when you're in the house, it was totally different than when you walked outdoors and it smelled like you were 3 feet away from a campfire. And it just sort of proved the indoor air quality to us. We're going to do some tests and publish those as well. So the other exciting data point that we have is, so we turned on the house's systems over 2 years ago. So no one was living here full time, but we were utilizing the house for open houses and showings and such. And we had it continuously heated and cooled and had the hot water on, the appliances plugged in. Average utility bill over 2 years, $69 a month. And that's for everything. That's heating, your space, your hot water. We weren't cooking too much then. It'll be interesting to see what it turns into with me living here, but I bet it's not going to be a lot more than that. So that's the dollars and cents of why you do it. It's pretty exciting. And that's without solar panels yet. We're going to get solar panels on the roof here. Our other 2 houses already have them. Then it's going to be $15 a month of the service charge to your utility company. That'll be it.
I really got intrigued around this whole conversation, really with something that you had mentioned earlier about the dense packed cellulose insulation. And I'm not sure if you've really dove into that, but the humidity range that it keeps indoor air at, where it keeps it quite constant between 40 and 60%, so that temperature can stay steady, but it's also anti-fungal because it's not too moist, and it's antimicrobial. And so it's just one of these like, wow, what an incredible technology to embed within.
And we sort of envelope. Came to that as a byproduct of a partnership. So these houses are panelized, meaning that the shell essentially is prefabricated. We are working with a company called Benson Wood out of New Hampshire. They have a big factory in Keene. It's really, really interesting place to go and see how they do this. It's 2-dimensional, right? It's not modular. They don't ship cubes. They ship wall panels. And then they all arrive on a flatbed truck with a crane, and they assemble the panels, and you have your entire shell weather tight in 3 days. It's amazing to watch. They install the triple pane windows and doors in the factory. So, and they were using dense packed cellulose. And then since we've been working with them, I don't know how much credit we can take for this, but they made a company policy that they will only build all electric buildings now. So that's pretty exciting
Wow.
too. But he's all into the whole climate thing. So he was already a believer in the dense packed cellulose and had set up their factory to utilize that product instead of foam. There are little places where you still need to use foam, but we minimize it. And they've been a
Oh,
tremendous
man.
partner with us. We sort of cross market with them now, and it's great to have believers in your supply chain.
Yeah, that's fantastic to also show the ramifications of what happens whenever you put yourself out there like that. Greg, a follow-up question here. I think for people that are inspired by this type of development, can you look back, and I know that you're still in it, you're very much in this project, but is there any kind of lesson learned if you were to boil it down to maybe one seminal thing that you would recommend to other people that want to go down a similar path?
Well, we've had a lot of lessons learned. we're As I said, we're a new team. We've tried a few different contracting groups. I think we've landed on a very solid crew at this point. But we've learned a lot of lessons. One of which has been one of our models has been don't do anything once. Make sure that you do it at least twice, maybe three times. Just being facetious, because that's doing it over and paying for it twice. But so we've learned how, I hope, on the next build that we'll be doing things once. I'd say for somebody just starting out on this, don't underestimate what the impact of your land decision is going to be. Because we bought that without having this, a strict economic model of how much our development cost per lot is going to be before you even get to the point of, moving dirt around for a driveway or a house site. What's happened is between our land choice and then the pandemic and the whole supply chain cost explosion, that's all. We're feeling that very much real time. We used to try to figure out how we could build at under $300 a square foot. And now the conversation is about keeping it under 400. In 2 years, it shifted that much. That 30%, 40% is real. So, we wound up now where our base house at present is over $1 million. And that's not where we wanted to start out. But that's a combination, like I say, of supply chain cost inflation and our land choice. So I guess I would counsel somebody to think carefully. If you're going to do something like this, maybe you want to do something that's a lot easier. It's flat. You're looking at 1 acre lots and sort of a more conventional development, because then it will be easier to sell at a lower price point where, it's easier to move houses these days. Doesn't mean that I wouldn't go back and do this site again, because it's so spectacular and I love it here. And as I mentioned, I moved out of New York City to live here full time because I am committed to this project. And it's also a fantastic house to live in and a place to live in. But that's one piece of advice I'd give.
You still got your full head of hair, Greg. You're looking good for any trials and tribulations that he might have gone through.
Yeah, not too long ago, it wasn't quite this gray. But
well, Greg, where can people learn more about the Catskills Project, or even if there's people that are in the region that want to come check it out? Is there any resources that we can direct them to?
Yeah, just go to our website. It's the Catskill singular project.com. And that's got our contact information. You put a note in there that you're interested in information, and we get back to you right away. I'm here now, so I'm always around to set up a site tour. We really want to get people here to see it. It looks great on the website. It looks better in person. The house is spectacular. It's light filled. It's an amazing space to live in, and the property is just gorgeous. We got our first 4 to 6 inch snowfall last night or night before, and got to walk the trail yesterday in the new snow. But yeah, check us out on the catskillproject.com. Fill out the little info sheet and join us. You can join us on Instagram, follow us there. All sorts of different ways you can stay in touch and do get in touch and start dialogues. We're, like I said, low pressure people, happy to talk to people, whether you're planning to, you're really interested in buying a house today or thinking about it a couple of years from now, or just want to understand what a passive house is like to live in because you might be thinking about building one someplace else. We're happy to talk to everybody. We just want more people to know about what we're doing here and take it out into the world, because that's really what we need.
Yeah, no, I wish I lived closer, because there's not very many communities out there that I can pinpoint to say, they've gone in and been really adherent towards all passive house standards and have pulled it off. So I really applaud you for sticking with it and showing up and being real vulnerable and honest about the process. We need more of that. That's why this show exists. And we'll be sure to link up your sites to our show notes and things like that. So Greg, it has been an absolute pleasure, and I'm going to take you up on a tour whenever I get out that way.
Yeah, I hope you do. Send anybody you know out here to take a look around. And, I also applaud what you guys are doing, highlighting what the world needs, which is people who are interested in sharing their knowledge, their understanding, their paths to really living a climate conducive lifestyle. So yeah, kudos and more power to you, and I hope your show does well.
If you want to follow our work at Latitude, you can follow us on Instagram at latitude.regenerative.re, and mine is at I am Neil Collins. We inherently believe in the potential that comes from connecting value-aligned and purpose-driven people together in community. That's why I encourage you to join our mighty network and introduce yourself to the other people working across the globe to advance a more regenerative, resilient, and beautiful world. Here, we want to know what you're working on and what inspires you. Through this platform, you can attend live events, take courses provided by our podcast guests, and create connection with other people and businesses that share your same passion. To join, find the link in our show notes or visit our website at chooselatitude.com. If you'd like to support the show, please share it with your friends and be sure to follow us on your podcast app so that you always have the latest episode downloaded. Another way to support our regenerative field building is to leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Positive ratings help attract amazing guests, and they can be the deciding factor for someone else to tune in and listen. And who knows? Maybe this is the kind of motivation that it takes for them to finally decide to align their profession with their sustainable and regenerative values and become a positive force for good within their own community. This show was produced by myself and edited by Anthony Wallace and offered as a part of our work with Latitude Regenerative Real Estate.